Salam, dear friends of BookBytes, and on this World UNESCO World Literacy Day, I'm very happy to be featuring a life narrative. I've just come from the launch of two local, very well represented South African authors, together with the Center for Creative Arts. And on tonight's feature, we have a new author who has written a memoir, very humbling, very courageous memoir called Prescription Icecream, A Doctor's Journey to Discover What Matters by Dr. Alastair Mcalpine, who is a pediatric infectious diseases physician who was born and raised in Johannesburg. His passions include preventing infections in kids, listening to noisy bands, and encouraging his colleagues to prescribe ice cream more frequently. And the thing with life narrative is that the relatability, and in this case, the extremely humbling nature of this narrative, is something that will really draw you into the story. So it gives me great pleasure and privilege to welcome on air with us this evening Alastair Mcalpine to BookBytes. Alastair, welcome to the show. It's so wonderful to have this opportunity to chat to you this evening. I know you're now based in Canada, so we've got you up on an early start this Sunday, but absolutely wonderful honor to have you. Welcome to BookBytes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And when you were telling me all about the raininess in Durban, I was getting very homesick because although I was born and bred in Joburg, as a young man, I spent a lot of time in and around Durban, and I miss that place so much, and it has a really special place in my heart.
Well, I hope you get an opportunity to visit again soon because, I mean, there's so many flavors to South Africa, which you've also captured in your memoir. And I really loved, and I said to you, I found it a very humbling read because of the kind of, depth and vulnerability through which you write the story. Tell us where it began for you. When did you start documenting the story, and what was the process like for you?
Sure. So I've always been a big reader. I love reading, and I mostly read fiction. And so I've always really loved stories. And I always thought one day I might write a book, but I didn't think that my life was really interesting enough to write about that. and I'm quite busy with my job. And then in 2018, when I was working in Cape Town, I was working in palliative care with children who are incredibly sick, and some of them are dying. And I was struggling. I couldn't see how they could be so happy and upbeat, and I was really feeling the weight of everything. And so I said to them one day, a few of them, how is it that you're able to stay so happy and humble when you're literally facing death? What makes you happy? And they told me, and they gave me these incredibly beautiful, simple, yet true answers. And I really took that to heart. And so one day, while I was eating my sandwich for lunch, I fired off a quick Twitter thread detailing what the kids had told me. And I had a couple hundred followers at the time, and usually only my mom liked my tweets. But for some reason, this particular one took off, and it really went viral and went around the world, and it was seen 20 million times, I think. And that's not because, I'm some genius, but I think because people could really relate to the underlying truth that the kids presented. And it just resonated with a lot of people who I think are sometimes struggling to find meaning in the fast-paced modern world that we live in, where everything feels so heavy. And so, that happened, and I was famous for about 24 hours, and then the news cycle moved on. But then a few years later, a publisher reached out and said, this is a remarkable thread, and we would be interested in not just the story behind the thread, but the story as to how you got there. And I told them and said it had been a bit of a bumpy road, that it featured, having to overcome some personal demons and some serious mental health issues. But they said, that's fine, we're happy to hear for that. So that was the genesis of Prescription Icecream and how the book came about. And I'd love to say I wrote it in 2 weeks in a fever dream of creativity, but the truth is writing a book is really hard. And it took about nearly 3 years to write it. But eventually my publisher sort of dragged me over the line, and I'm glad that they did.
Well, I mean, when you're talking, I'm remembering that you do talk about the thread and the engagement with children, your young patients. And there's something about the vulnerability, honesty, and innocence of children, and the ability to see the world without filters and to be able to express that, which is so beautiful. And I think that's the relatability that we can all find in you documenting those comments from your patients. So that was really fantastic. But also the vulnerability with which you reach deep into writing your own story, writing about being an intern, writing about your own mental health journey, and writing about addiction. Speak to us about some of those, the challenges you might have faced with digging deep in order to write.
Yeah, well, mental physician mental health and people's mental health is a subject that's obviously close to my heart because as I detailed in the book, I at a fairly young age found myself addicted to alcohol and addicted to alcohol in a really destructive way. And it nearly derailed my life completely. I had to go into a rehabilitation facility. I relapsed in that facility. I had to then spend more time. So I had a really long journey. Finding sobriety was not easy for me. It did not come easy. And we all know that within South Africa and in the Western Cape, where I was based at the time, there are huge drug problems for everybody. It's not just a disease that affects people of lower socioeconomic class. It cuts right across, and in particular, physicians with the stress of the job, the stress of the training, the proximity to addictive substances. It's a huge problem, and it's something that no one talks about because I don't know, maybe we want doctors to be these perfect human beings who never make mistakes and are like these robots who just know what's going on. But that's not what
Yeah.
we're like. We're human beings, and we have weaknesses and flaws like all human beings. And not talking about these flaws and our mental health challenges is causing huge harm. Huge numbers of doctors are leaving the profession because they're so burnt out, or at the extreme end, they're taking their own lives because they can't deal with the sadness and the depression. And so it feels to me like this is a real problem affecting so many people, but we don't talk about it. And so it's my hope that by getting vulnerable myself, we can spark a conversation at least about how we handle mental health problems within the medical community, because it's a conversation that is really worth having. And I will say, I didn't originally want to talk about it. When I was writing, I wasn't sure that I wanted to get that vulnerable and talk about my own journey because I thought I would be judged. I thought people would say, "Gosh, look at this weakling who succumbed to alcohol." But I realized that if I didn't talk about it, the book wouldn't feel true and it wouldn't feel real. And as you said at the beginning of the interview, I think for a memoir to work, people have to believe that the person that they're reading is a real human with a relatable story and that they're kind of telling you the truth. And I realized that if I didn't talk about mental health, if I didn't talk about addiction, then the story would feel incomplete. And I don't think people would relate to it like they have.
I'll tell you, one of the very authentic points for me in the memoir was where you actually outline how you felt you were somebody who had a certain amount of luxury, a relatively good, life, and not any real trauma. So you kind of, and this is important because a lot of us sort of self-regulate in that way and say, well, everything's going fine. You shouldn't actually have to fall apart. We hold ourselves to a certain standard that we're not always capable of upholding. And that's part of the challenge in mental health issues. So I thought that was really, significant for many of us reading, saying, sometimes, you're going to be human and you're going to stumble. And that
100%.
Comes through very strongly.
100%. And sometimes, you don't, there doesn't need to be a reason. I mean, sometimes there is, obviously, but sometimes people find themselves addicted because they're addicted. They find themselves depressed, even though their life is going great, or they find themselves with some mental condition. And, my plea to anyone listening out there who would be struggling would be that whatever the reason, it's not your fault. And that help is available. And if you're struggling, please know that, there is a way out. And people out there are willing to help. And if you want to read a story from someone who was at the bottom, maybe hopefully my story can provide some sort of solace.
There's also this idea of coming full circle, because you're receptive to, even though maybe you don't realize at the time when you're in the middle of your struggle, you're receptive to what life offers. And I think that's such an important point for any of us to say, sometimes life provides the exact opportunities that you need to break that hurdle, to move beyond it. What would you say to that through some of your experiences?
I would, that's not to say that bad things, when bad things happen, that like you deserve it or anything. But what I will say is that, character is often forged in adversity, and sometimes things happen for a purpose that is perhaps not something that I can't understand. So I know that going through rehab and the humbling experience that was has ultimately made me a better physician and probably a better person. And I think a lot of people who've been humbled by life, in whatever capacity, sometimes we do need to be reminded that we are not at the top of the food chain, and that no matter what you do, sometimes life will humble you. And those experiences, while not pleasant, can be used to build a better, stronger version of you, a you that can help hopefully inspire other people, or at least show them that, alcoholism doesn't have to be the end of the road. Drug addiction doesn't have to be the end of the road. Depression, or whatever it is that you're going through, that other people have found a way out. And so I think it does ultimately help. And I think it did make me a better person, although it wasn't very pleasant at the time.
Okay, so a big part of the story, aside from the transformation through addiction and healing, mental health challenges, is that you write about your working life in the belly of the beast. Everyone who's ever heard a story of an intern who has had to work at Baragwanath Hospital from anywhere in the world will say some of the experiences you have in Baragwanath Hospital are experiences you can't buy, the experiences you can't get anywhere else in the world. Talk to us about this. I don't even have a word. This fantastic, exhausting, exhilarating experience of being a doctor and intern in Baragwanath Hospital.
Sure, and I think, Baragwanath is not unique. I think that any South African doctor who has worked at almost any South African public hospital, can relate to some or all of it, because it's the idea that a lot of the hospitals are poorly resourced, understaffed, and overrun by people needing help. And so, it's an absolutely extraordinary experience. You just see the most incredible things. It sometimes feels like you're in a bit of a war zone, but you do get the most incredible exposure to things that other people would not. But, as I sort of document in the book, that exposure does come at a bit of a price, because you're seeing, it's easy when you're seeing so many patients. It's almost impossible to care when you have a list of 55 patients under you, to provide meaningful care to every single one of them. Almost by definition, they become numbers, and they become names on a list that you need to get out, because you've got more names on a list coming in. And so, I have very mixed feelings, because on the one hand, it made me so much better from a clinical perspective, but it also hardened my soul a little bit. And I don't know that hardening of the soul is what we want to do to our junior doctors. I would prefer it if we could say it's okay to have manageable patient lists, so that you can actually care for your patients, rather than, just dozens and dozens of people who you can see maybe for 5 minutes in any given day, because you simply don't have the time. So it's very much a give and a take. It's very much a bittersweet. And so as a result, my feelings of my internship are very mixed, because some things were great, some things were not great. And I hope that I sort of capture that in the book, because there's great stuff, there's not so great stuff. And that's kind of the nature of the South African public healthcare system.
I mean, I appreciated the camaraderie, the kind of like you're in this together that you get from doctors working together, but also the observations of just how challenging it is to work on limited resources, and how much is expected of you. You're being squeezed dry every single day. Um, so it really is, it does come across as survival. My question now would be, how much are state facilities and those policymakers actually taking the advice and experience of young doctors on the ground in making changes and making a shift and creating a shift, you think, within those spaces?
So obviously, I can't speak to it now, and I hope that it's changed. But when this all happened, and this is about 20 years ago now, I can't believe it, 17 years ago. Um, the unfortunate thing was that the people running the hospitals simply didn't care. They were not overly concerned about the attitudes of junior doctors. We were these minor cogs in a big machine that could be quite easily replaced if we were proving troublesome. And the bigger, more important issue was, well, I mean, sometimes overt corruption. And as I document in the story, at one point, we paid a huge amount of money for these ridiculous blue lights to be installed into the wards to combat TB, which was very obviously a kickback. Someone was getting something because that was ridiculous. You know,
Okay.
the CEO at the time when I was there, who shall remain nameless, for her, the most important thing was that we looked good when politicians visited. So we knew that the president was coming. Suddenly all the wards got cleaned. Plants appeared everywhere. Pictures were dusted. It looked great for the politicians, but on a day-to-day basis, she didn't care what was happening. And so I would love it, and I really hope that things have changed. But the junior doctors really do know what's going on the ground, and I would like to hope that the new administrators would listen to them very carefully. I don't know if they
I mean,
are.
I think that through an engaging and vulnerable memoir, the ability that, I mean, the opportunity you've used to also make comment on the health system is important. And I hope that, you know, that people will be picking up this book, not just for the relatability, but also from that social kind of awareness that's being created and that kind of comment through that as well. Patients, engagement with patients. I found some of the stories so delightful. And especially when you're dealing with young patients, speak to us about some of your experiences with the youth, with the young patients, aside from the wonderfully viral post, the relatable kind of commentary. Your on the ground connection with your patients is so beautifully expressed. Speak to us about some of those experiences.
Thanks. Well, so I'm a pediatrician, so obviously I'm biased in that I like children, and I think, you know, patients and young children are a little bit, I hope they don't hate this analogy, a little bit like horses. They can kind of tell if you like being around them, and they can tell if you're
Right.
uncomfortable. And so I think that they can pick up quite early on that you're someone who enjoys hanging out with them and enjoys their presence. But, you know, children are just delightful, you know, and there's nothing like pediatrics. And I can remember one night, it was 3 a.m. and I was freezing cold, and I'd been called to the ward, and I was exhausted and I didn't want to be there. And there was a youngster standing in their cot blowing me, you know, raspberries going, and it was just the most hilarious thing at 3 in the morning. And I just blew raspberries, and we spent about 10 minutes blowing raspberries to each other, and both of us just giggling hysterically. And that's just something that I just love about peds. But I think the big thing about youngsters is that they can smell when you're being inauthentic. They can smell when you're talking nonsense, and you've got to find some way to connect. And whether there's one youngster who liked noisy metal bands like I do, and that was how we connected. There was another youngster who also liked loud. He just would never stop crying. But the only time he stopped crying was when I put on loud rock music. Finding that something to show the patients that you understand them and that you're being real, and also offering a part of yourself and showing some degree of vulnerability and showing that you are not this robot who's there to hurt them, but rather that you're a human being who cares about them. I think that was the key for me to relating better to the patients. And once you crack the code and once you've gained their trust, then it's a whole different ball game. And that was the time when I found that I was really able to make progress. And that was when they would let their guard down and, allow me to do my job. So again, it all boils down to sort of authenticity and then finding that spark, that connect, that very human thing, because we're all human beings. There's so much that connects us, and there's so much more that connects us than divides us. And so finding that connection is really important. And I think sometimes, sadly, people are too busy or they're too tired to find it. And that's why I think with adults and with kids, the relationship with their physician breaks down. And they, we've all had that feeling where we're like, I just don't think my doctor cares. They wanted to get me in, they wanted to get me out, they wanted their money. Whereas when you find that thing that connects you, that human spark, that's when you really feel like you're being heard and respected. And kids are exactly the same. So I don't always succeed, but that's certainly something that I always try to find.
There's this general sort of stereotype that children are scared by the boogeyman and doctors, and the idea that, we're going to, you get to go to a doctor and it just doesn't feel like a good thing. And they always say that children are the best judges of character because of their unfiltered kind of way of connecting. So obviously, your success is in being able to be vulnerable with your patients. And so it's an opportune time. You have spoken about it briefly for us to talk about your horrible taste in music, because obviously that was a way. I mean, how did you know over the years that this would actually come full circle as a way to connect with possibly one of your more less engaging patients? Let's talk about your horrible taste in music.
So I had kind of normal taste in music for quite a long time, and I still quite like normal music, But what I found when I was really struggling was that very, very noisy, scary that music that most people find very scary, because it was so overwhelming and it was so all-encompassing. It enabled me to kind of relax. The paradox, right? Of if something is so loud, you cannot focus on anything else. And so if you have an anxious brain like I do, the brain kind of has to shut down in the face of this oral assault. And that's actually a peaceful thing if you've got a brain that overheats. And so I found peace in this very, very loud music. And, very few people like it. It's very niche, and that's totally fine. But what I sort of discovered in amongst this is that two things, is that A, the heart likes what the heart likes. And if it's not hurting anybody, like what you like. If the thing that you like is something that not many people like, that's totally fine. And more importantly, sometimes the things that you like and the things that make you will come back in the future, some way down the line, and enable you to connect with someone that maybe you never thought you'd be able to connect with. So I had a youngster who wasn't talking to any doctors, and he was a teenager, and he was surly and unhappy, and he just wanted to go home, but he couldn't because he was too sick. And he liked metal. And I could see he liked metal because he was wearing a metal shirt. So the next day, I went to work wearing my metal shirt. And initially, he thought maybe I was being a poser or wasn't really a fan. So he kind of tested my knowledge out. But once he realized that I really was, he really opened up. And that was the first time that he had opened up to anybody. And so, again, I would emphasize, I'm not saying everyone has to go out there and listen to noisy black metal. But what I would say is that don't ever be afraid to express yourself in the way that makes you happy, because that often gives other people permission to express themselves as well.
I thought that was just wonderful, because for me, what it said was, as I read through your manuscript, through your memoir, some of these seemingly unconnected little puzzle pieces eventually join together and make perfect sense. And I think that's what makes this such a satisfying read. To be able to join that dotted line and see how it all fits together in the end. So I was grateful that you were able to present that story in a way that everyone would be like, oh, this actually fits together. And life narrative can do that sometimes better than fiction can. So congratulations on that kind of successfully achieving that perfect puzzle
Thank you.
in prescription ice cream as well. And it all making sense. I suppose that's the beauty of learning through life.
Thank you. And also, I've read enough books that I know that, famous Chekhov's gun. If you introduce an idea early on, there should be a reason and a payoff later. So I'm glad that you appreciated the writing, because I tried to make sure that if themes and ideas came in, that they didn't just disappear. But I will say that writing a book, having read a lot of books, writing a book is a good book, at least, and I hope it's good. I didn't think it was when I finished it, is really hard. So it's easier to read good books than it is to write them, that's for sure.
The thing I appreciate about good memoir is that you're joining the conversation, an ongoing conversation about how important life narrative is to join these dots that make us who we are as human beings. And I think that prescription ice cream definitely accomplishes that. So we're very grateful to have you on BookBytes, and I hope that many young doctors and young people are reading this book or picking up copies of the book to really celebrate one of our local narratives, one of our stories, especially through your eyes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope people read it. I hope they enjoy it. If you're someone who wants to know what it's like to be a junior doctor, you might enjoy it. If you're someone who's struggling with addiction or mental health, maybe you'll enjoy it. If you're someone who is overwhelmed and looking for a bit of direction in life, maybe you'll enjoy the bit where the kids tell you what to do. So I'm hoping that there's a little bit of something for everyone, or maybe not, and you just enjoy the writing. So I'm so pleased you enjoyed it, and thank you for the very kind words.
I also think it was important how layered the narrative was, because, it's not just the journey of somebody becoming a doctor or somebody going through the process of healing through addiction. You've also got this layering of family relationships, trying to find yourself through relationships before you before life makes sense, so to speak. And there's so many young people who will be able to identify with those layers, because you're sort of juggling all these different things at the same time and then coming full circle eventually. And I think there's hope in narratives of this nature for young people thinking, I'm just not seeing everything make sense as well. So with October coming up, Mental Health Awareness Month coming up, it's also the kind of story that really has gravitas in allowing young people to reflect on their lives and where they are in terms of, different intentions coming together, or finding a fork in the road and making the decision of which way to go.
Yeah, being a young person is hard. There's a lot going on. There's relationship stuff, there's life stuff, there's career stuff, there's family stuff. Young people have I often feel the further along we get in our humanity journey, the more difficult it is to be a young person. And so I struggled as a young person in many ways. And again, I hope the book sort of shows that a young doctor is struggling with all the other life stuff that the girl who's not paying you attention, the family strife that's getting to you, the lack of pay from your job, the grumpy boss, whatever that may be. Being a young person is hard, and it certainly was hard for me. And I hope again that I captured some of that in the book, because it's not easy.
Alastair, thank you so much for giving us your time and your beautiful memoir. I think that this would even work as a workbook if counselors were sitting together and dealing with young people, really in tandem with the ability to be able to make notes and reflections. So a beautiful book that will have great traction in many spaces, and I wish you everything of the best with it. I hope we see more writing from you in the future, and I hope that you'll be visiting South Africa and having talks and meeting more people around the journey of this narrative. So once again, thanks so much for giving us your time this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love coming back to South Africa. I miss home every single day. My partner will definitely drag me home at some point. South Africa is a beautiful, beautiful, special place. And anyone who's ever had to leave for any period of time will tell you that. It never leaves your soul. And I miss it every day.
Well, I hope you can take the flavor of it out to your patients in other parts of the world where you operate, and definitely come back home to refuel with what is local and lekker. All the best for you.
Thank you so much.
And so there you have it. We spoke to Dr. Alastair Mcalpine about his beautiful memoir, Prescription Ice Cream, A Doctor's Journey to Discover What Matters. Do get yourself a copy. And that's it from us this weekend on BookBytes. Assalamu alaikum. And that's it from us in the team.